Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chris with InsideTheU. Thanks for stopping by. So in this video, I'd like to recap the first day of the early signing period for the Miami Hurricanes, but also I want to hear your comments on maybe who you're most excited about. Miami signed 8 players, 7 of them are 4-star recruits. According to the 24/7 Sports composite rankings, there's a number of different guys to be excited. 2 of them on offense, 6 on defense. To me, what stands out, the big news of the day amongst those guys is they were able to land Nigely Kelly out of Fort Lauderdale Dillard High School, a defensive end, 6'4", has really good athleticism off the edge, top 100 recruit, top 15 at his position. So I think it was a great sign for Coach Cristobal in particular, because I do not believe that Nigely was going to pick Miami under the previous coaching regime. And I think it was a good sign that Cristobal had a good connection with him in the recruiting process before Coach took over as the head guy at Miami. So I think that relationship certainly helped, that connection that Nigely felt comfortable with. Even though that the defensive coaches are not announced and in place, Nigely is confident in Coach Cristobal clearly. So I think that's a good sign. Nigely picked Miami over Florida State, Florida, Auburn, and Georgia. So certainly good programs in there. Another guy that Miami was able to get that was not committed is 3-star cornerback Jayden Harris. He's a guy that, is someone that's been identified as maybe a sleeper prospect out of Atlanta, someone to keep in mind moving forward. And, he picked Miami over Georgia Tech, Missouri, and Kansas State. Solid programs, not the level of programs, obviously, that Nigely picked. But, again, it's another positive for Coach Cristobal. Jayden becomes he was the first official guy to commit to Miami under Cristobal. And I know many of you are curious about Wesley Besant, who actually committed to Miami a couple days before Cristobal was officially named head coach. But going back to Jayden, what stands out to me about him as a cornerback is, he's one of 4 guys that's a defensive back amongst these 8 guys. So very competitive group, clearly a lot of talent in that group. Chris Graves is a guy out of Fort Myers, Bishop Vero High School. He was someone I saw on film last year, playing wide receiver before he kind of has been making more of a transition to cornerback. I do believe that's where he's going to project at in college, but certainly if they really needed him to play receiver, he could do that as well. But I think cornerback is where they're going to start him out at, and that's certainly going to be interesting to see what they do with him. But he's a guy with good size, good length, and he was a former teammate with Malik Curtis, so I think that definitely helped in his recruitment as well. And kind of moving on, kind of staying with this defensive backs, before I name the other 2 guys, I think it's good that they add these 4 guys to the mix because they already have some good young talent in the secondary already on the roster. Cameron Kitchens and James Williams earned starting roles later in the season in their first year. James Williams, a former 5-star recruit, and Kitchens showed flashes just like James did. So I think that was a good sign. And then also Avante Williams, a second-rated safety in that 2020 class. This was his first full year playing. And, all 3 of those guys showed flashes, showed some ability. So mixing these guys in with them. And Marcus Clark is another guy, a cornerback in his second year, earned some more playing time as the year went on. So I think it's going to be very interesting, kind of just with this young core in the secondary with these defensive backs to see, who's going to emerge from the group. And also if there's any veterans, maybe a guy like Corey Couch starts to improve his play and kind of holds off on these guys in terms of it being a real young secondary. So I'm very curious to see how it's all going to shake out. I had an article on InsideTheU.com about that, about the secondary, and kind of what it looks like moving forward. And certainly Miami is still a little uncertain in terms of the futures of Tyreek Stevenson, DJ Ivey, and Al Blades Jr., all for different reasons. But I think that's why these guys were so important, because they do need good young players to build on moving forward, whether it's next season, in lead roles or even in 2023. So a good start for Miami. As far as the other 2 defensive backs that they were able to get, Kamari Rogers out of Mississippi was a guy that they were able to hang on to. They didn't keep everybody that they had committed going into the day. I'll get into that a little bit, but they were able to keep Kamari Rogers. I think that's a good sign. Another guy highly regarded at his position, top 20 at his position. And he's also considered the second highest rated guy behind Nigely in the class. So talent is there, good for Kamari, good for Miami to get a guy like that, particularly in a state like that that's very competitive with other teams in the ACC, but also the SEC as well in that environment. So they get those 4 defensive backs, and once again, drop in the comments, maybe there's one of those guys that intrigues you the most. So drop in the comments, let me know there. I definitely like hearing what you guys have to say. So moving on, I'm kind of going back to linebacker with Wesley Besant. He's a guy that I've been very impressed with over his careers. He's a linebacker that Miami has needed because he flies to the ball. He's got good athleticism, good speed, and he's very productive coming from a program that wins. I always like when that happens, out of Miami Central there. And I know many of you are curious, was he going to commit? Was he actually going to be a Hurricane after all that has gone on with his recruitment? And certainly a good sign that he was, and I think he's going to make an impact in his first year. Regardless of when he arrives on campus, I think he's going to make a quick adjustment. Again, he's a guy that understands what it takes. He's been in competitive environments for a while now at the high school level, and I think he's going to transition just fine. And I always like his aggressiveness. Again, a guy that makes tackles, and we've not seen that out of the linebacker position over the last couple years. So I think getting him in there will be key. And also, like I said, I think he's going to make an immediate impact. Of these 8 guys that Miami signed, I think Wesley's the guy that, to me, has a chance to make that immediate impact in year 1. Kind of switching back. So those are the 6 defensive players that Miami signed. Again, Graves is a guy that could flip to receiver, but I think with Miami, the amount of young receivers they have already on the roster, I think that he's going to stick at cornerback. So quarterback Ja'Carri Brown out of Valdosta, Georgia. He's a guy that's been committed for a while. He did not waver, even though other schools were coming at him in the recruiting process, particularly anytime there's a coaching change or coaching uncertainty. Other schools are going to try to get him on board. But he stayed true to his commitment. I think he's a guy that we've talked about over the year, or over the time that he's been committed. And I think he's continued to make progress with his game. I think that's always important at that position. Every position is obviously important to show strides, but certainly that quarterback spot, because there's just so many things that go into it. So I like what we've seen with the growth of Ja'Carri. I think he has a chance to come in. He doesn't have that pressure, which I always like with quarterbacks. They don't have that pressure to step right into lead roles. They can sit back and kind of understand what it takes. I think that's what really benefited Tyler Van Dyke. He was able to sit back his first year at Miami, and then he was able to kind of use that learning experience, learning what it takes. And then when it was his opportunity, he was able to take advantage of it. So Ja'Carri comes in. He's going to get a little bit of that time as well to just kind of develop and once again learn what it takes. And I think it was interesting also that Ja'Carri feels very comfortable and confident in Coach Cristobal, because look, he could go to these other schools that have their offensive coordinator in place, have a system in place. But I think the fact that Ja'Carri stayed true to his commitment shows you his, just his desire to be a Hurricane, but also his belief in Coach Cristobal, because obviously they've met and he had an interaction with him as well, and he just believes in him. And I think that's a good sign for him. And I think that's what stood out to me in general with this class, because again, these guys are 4-star recruits, many of them. They had other options if they wanted to go elsewhere, but they wanted to stick with Coach Cristobal. They wanted to stick with Miami. Again, I think that's a positive sign. And then the 8th and final guy that I haven't talked about yet is 6'3" wide receiver Isaiah Horton out of Tennessee. He's a guy that brings some size to that receiver spot. I think that's very important. I've talked about this quite a bit over recent years, because Miami's really lacked that big physical wide receiver, which I think that they need to have on the roster. So getting Isaiah to provide some flexibility with his versatility at that position, it gives the offense a different look, because if you're just rolling out the same type of receiver all the time, defenses can adjust to that pretty well. So I like what Isaiah brings to the table. Again, he's one of these guys that doesn't have to come in and make an immediate impact, because they do have other guys. Again, it's going to be competitive, but the key for a guy like Isaiah, the key for a lot of these guys is to come in, learn, and develop, and not get frustrated with not playing. I know that's difficult for a lot of players across the country, but that is very important for all these guys. You've got to stay focused on developing and just understand that it takes a process before you're ready to play, and you've got to continue to get better and essentially get ready for your opportunity whenever that might come up. So Miami did lose a couple guys that were committed going into signing day, going into this final period here, and that was wide receiver Landon Aviata out of Louisiana, who picked LSU, a 3-star recruit. So he did bolt for LSU, which a lot of in-state guys, if they have that option, this has happened for years, but certainly disappointing, because he's a guy that did show flashes. And we've talked about him quite a bit as well. since he's been committed. And then the other one's Flintha Carswell, a big 6'7" former basketball player, offensive lineman out of Georgia, and he picked Ole Miss. That's where they're at right now. 8 signees. They do lose a couple guys. And as far as moving forward, because many of you are curious, well, what about these other guys that you've been hearing about? Check out all the VIP articles that have been on the site. And there's going to be plenty more moving forward. And a lot of this stuff is fluid. But there's some big names still out there. Some of these guys are going to sign later in the early signing period, like a guy like Jaleel Skinner, an Alabama commit, a tight end, 4-star recruit, played at IMG, formerly from South Carolina, but he's a guy Miami has pursued. He picked Alabama, and then he gave Miami another shot. So he's one to watch for. He could sign on that third day. So keep him in mind, and like I said, stay locked in on the updates. And the other thing, too, is these other guys with Cyrus Moss, a defensive lineman out of Las Vegas, Nevada. He's a guy that's considering a lot of schools down the stretch here. Oregon, Arizona State, USC, so definitely check him out as well. And he's a guy that might wait more towards his All-American game performance, so it might be a while with him, but also he could sign early as well. Definitely like stay locked in. A lot of this is going to change. And then another guy, Kevin Coleman, a wide receiver out of St. Louis. He's a guy that has really been considering Miami, another 4-star recruit. Florida State's in on him, Oregon, with that ties he has there with Oregon. And so definitely keep those schools in mind. And Coleman's a guy to definitely keep in mind, an eye on. And again, there was another VIP update on the website. So definitely find out more about Coleman there as well. Marcus Banks, Alabama cornerback, a transfer. He's a guy that could make his announcement at any point. It's a little bit different with the transfer portals when they make their announcements, but his announcement could come at any time. But as of now, these are Miami's 8 signees. Those are some names to keep in mind. They're still in the mix with these guys. And to me, I just think it's a good sign that Coach Cristobal has his name in the mix. Miami is in the mix with these guys. It's certainly very difficult for a coach to come in and get everybody on board that he wants. But I think, whether it's this early signing period, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how his recruitment goes in January, leading into that February signing period. That starts that first week of February. So once he gets his coaching staff in, which is coming, just stay patient. They wanted to get through this, but I think the coaching announcements are going to start coming. I think the first announcement that you're going to hear is definitely offensive line coach Alex Mirabal. So definitely keep that in mind as this moves forward. But definitely Miami's going to be in the mix for some guys they were not in the picture with before. Like I said, drop in the comments. Thanks for everybody for watching. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these videos. Hopefully you enjoyed signing day today. And just like I said, stay locked in. Thanks again for everybody for watching, and take care.